Inside a decaying oak log, PFC Eddie Brennan couldn't feel his legs anymore. He'd been lying in this coffin of rotting wood since 3:30 that morning, his Springfield rifle barrel protruding through what appeared to be nothing more than a natural knot in the timber. Through his scope, he counted 13 German soldiers assembling an MG-42 machine gun position 60 yards from where he lay hidden. His orders were crystal clear: observe and report, nothing more. In the next 4 hours, he would disobey those orders 14 times, trigger the largest artillery barrage in Third Army history, and force the United States Army to fundamentally rewrite how it trained snipers. But first, the Army would try to court-martial him. The waiting game. Dawn fog clung to the forest floor like a burial shroud. Brennan had been inserted under cover of darkness by a two-man patrol who thought he'd lost his mind. The log measured 9 feet long, hollowed by decades of decomposition, with an interior diameter that barely accommodated his shoulders. He'd lined it with a rubberized poncho to mask the stench of rot from his uniform. His canteen dug into his kidney. His left leg had gone numb an hour ago. None of it mattered. Through his scope, he observed the Germans working with mechanical efficiency. A Feldwebel with a heavily scarred face directed the operation. The MG-42 went up on its tripod, ammunition belts coiled in neat arrangements. They were establishing an enfilade position covering the forest trail where Baker Company, 143 men strong, would advance at 11 o'clock. Brennan had studied the battalion plan the previous night. He knew the mathematics of slaughter. The MG-42 fired 1,200 rounds per minute. Baker Company would be annihilated before they understood what was happening. His orders repeated in his mind like a prayer. Observe enemy positions, mark coordinates, exfiltrate after dark, report findings. Do not engage unless compromised. Captain Holloway had been explicit. Your eyes, Brennan, not a trigger finger. We need intelligence, not cowboy heroics. Brennan adjusted his position by half an inch. The log creaked like a groan from hell itself. A German private snapped his head toward the sound. Brennan stopped breathing, stopped his heart from beating if such a thing were possible. 8 seconds. The private stared directly at the log before returning to his ammunition boxes. Brennan exhaled through his nose. His heart hammered against the rotting wood. The making of a ghost. Eddie Brennan grew up in Johnstown, Pennsylvania, where the blast furnaces of Bethlehem Steel defined existence. His father worked those furnaces until 1936, when a ladle accident crushed both legs and ended a career. At 14, Eddie became the family's breadwinner. He worked the salvage yards, stripping copper wire from industrial corpses, selling scrap metal, learning to identify value in wreckage. His hands developed calluses like armor plate. His eyes learned to see what others missed: the stress fracture in a support beam, the valuable casting hidden beneath rust, the fatal weakness in any structure. Saturdays meant hunting groundhogs in the strip mine wastelands east of town. His rifle was a .22 single shot his grandfather had carried in the Great War. Ammunition cost money the family didn't have, so every cartridge had to count. He learned patience. Sometimes he waited 4 hours for a single groundhog, sometimes all day. Patience became muscle memory, as natural as breathing. He also learned to disappear. The mine police didn't appreciate kids on company property. Brennan discovered that absolute stillness against a right background made him invisible. Human eyes register movement, not stillness. Once he sat motionless 15 feet from 2 security guards actively searching for him. They gave up after 20 minutes, never seeing what was right in front of him. When he enlisted in December 1942, the recruiter asked about his skills. Brennan said he could shoot and stay still. The recruiter laughed and stamped his papers for infantry. the education of war. By September 1944, Brennan had survived North Africa, Sicily, and Normandy. He'd been trained as a designated marksman after a lieutenant noticed 8 kills in 3 days during the hedgerow fighting, all single shots, all over 300 yards. They gave him a Springfield with an unital scope and told him to keep doing what he was doing. But what he'd been doing wasn't working anymore. The Hürtgen Forest consumed soldiers. The Germans had transformed 50 square miles of dense woodland into a killing maze, interlocking fields of fire, pre-sighted artillery coordinates, machine gun nests and bunkers that American mortars couldn't scratch, snipers and tree platforms, minefields disguised as forest paths. American doctrine prescribed advancing through forest in company strength, clearing each strong point with infantry assault supported by artillery. American casualties testified that doctrine was killing them faster than the Germans. In 3 weeks, Brennan's battalion lost 97 men. He knew because he kept a list, not just numbers, names. PFC Tommy Adler from Brooklyn, shot through the neck, flanking a bunker. Sergeant Frank Yablonsky from Detroit stepped on a shoe mine and bled out before the medic could reach him. Corporal James Farper from San Francisco, killed by tree-burst artillery that detonated in the canopy and rained shrapnel like God's own wrath. Brennan tried to help. Standard doctrine positioned snipers 200 to 300 yards behind advancing infantry, providing overwatch and suppressive fire. But the forest canopy blocked sight lines beyond 50 yards. He couldn't see targets, couldn't protect his unit. He just listened to the gunfire and waited for casualty reports. After the harbor incident, he approached Captain Holloway.
Sir, the doctrine doesn't work here. The forest is too dense. I need to get forward of the advance, find hide positions deep in German territory, take out their machine guns before they can engage our infantry. Holloway stared at him like he'd suggested charging Berlin alone. Forward of the advance? That's suicide, Brennan, and it violates every principle of sniper employment. Sir, we're losing 30 men a week to machine gun ambushes. You can follow orders, Private. Snipers don't operate independently in this army. You're not a partisan. You're not a one-man war. You're part of a unit, and units function through coordination and command structure. Dismissed. That night in his foxhole, Brennan did the mathematics. 30 men a week, 4 weeks until rotation. 120 more names on his list unless something changed. Breaking the system. The next morning, he went to First Sergeant McKenna, a coal miner from West Virginia who'd survived Kasserine Pass by ignoring a colonel's order to hold position. McKenna listened, said nothing, then directed Brennan to Lieutenant Hayes, the battalion S2 intelligence officer. Hayes was 23, Harvard-educated, and wore the haunted expression of someone who discovered his education was worthless in the real world. He listened to Brennan's proposal, then asked 3 questions. Can you infiltrate the position without detection? Can you survive 12 hours alone in German territory? Can you exfiltrate if compromised? Brennan answered yes to all 3. He didn't mention he'd never actually done any of them. Hayes studied him for a long moment, then opened a map case. Baker Company advances down this trail at 1100 tomorrow. Intelligence indicates Germans have established positions along this ridge. I need locations, strength estimates, weapon types. You'll insert, observe, exfiltrate after dark. He paused. Observe only. Do not engage unless compromised. If you're captured, you were acting without orders. Understood? Brennan understood perfectly. Hayes was giving him deniable authorization. If Brennan succeeded, Hayes would claim credit. If Brennan failed, Hayes would deny knowledge. Either way, Brennan would finally be in position to do something useful. Finding the perfect grave. That night in sleep was impossible, not from fear, but from planning. The forest floor was too exposed. German patrols made noise discipline impossible with dry leaves. Tree platforms were suicide. German snipers already owned the canopy. Bunkers required construction time he didn't have. He needed something that existed naturally, something Germans wouldn't investigate, something providing concealment and a firing position. He left his foxhole and walked the forest edge under moonlight filtering through gaps in the canopy. He was searching for something specific, though he couldn't have explained what. After 30 minutes, he found it. A massive oak log, fallen years ago, rotted hollow, lying parallel to what would be the German approach route. He knelt aside it and peered inside. The interior had decomposed into soft punk wood, but the outer shell remained intact. The log had several natural knot holes. One faced the direction Germans would approach, another provided a downrange view. He spent an hour evaluating. The log sat in a slight depression, partially obscured by ferns. From 20 yards, it looked like forest debris. From 10 yards, it still looked like forest debris. The interior smelled like death and mushrooms, but it was dry. He could fit inside if he entered feet first and army crawled. The knothole was exactly at the right height for a rifle barrel if he propped on his elbows. Perfect. At 3:15 a.m., 2 privates from the recon platoon escorted him to the log. One of them, Private Angelo, said, "You're going to die in there, Brennan. You know that, right?" Brennan replied, "Probably not today." He entered feet first at 3:30. The interior was tighter than estimated. His shoulders scraped rotted wood, centipedes and beetles scattered. Something larger, a rat maybe, bolted past his face. He ignored it and positioned himself with his rifle barrel protruding through the knothole. Through his scope, he had a 60-yard field of fire covering the approach trail and a small clearing. Perfect. He waited for dawn. The mathematics of killing. By 8:47, the Germans had arrived. 13 soldiers. The Feldwebel directed them with hand signals. Professional, confident, routine. They'd done this before. Brennan observed. Machine gun position established at 9:03. Ammunition count estimated to 2,000 rounds based on visible containers. Crew of 4. Supporting infantry spread in a semicircle covering approaches. Radio operative visible with pack set. Officer present, the Feldwebel with the scar. At 10:15, a German soldier walked directly toward Brennan's log. Brennan stopped breathing. The soldier was maybe 19. Thin face, needed a shave. He stopped 6 feet from the log, unbuttoned his trousers, and urinated on the ferns. Through his scope, he could see individual buttons on the soldier's tunic. The kid finished, buttoned up, walked back to position. At 10:15, Baker Company began their approach. He couldn't see them, but he could hear the rustle of equipment, whispered commands, the distinctive metallic click of M1 Grand bolts. They were following the trail exactly as planned. They would pass directly through the MG-42's killing zone in approximately 10 minutes. Brennan faced the mathematics. 14 Germans, 143 Americans. Machine gun with pre-sighted fields of fire.
His orders were to observe and report, but reporting took time. By the time he exfiltrated, found friendly lines, reported coordinates, and called in artillery, Baker Company would already be engaged. Half would be dead or wounded. The rest pinned down, easy targets for German mortars. Unless someone stopped the machine gun. He adjusted his scope. Range, 62 yards. Wind, negligible under canopy. Target, machine gunner's head visible above the weapon shield. Easy shot for his skill level. Consequences, disobeying direct orders, revealing his position, fighting alone against 13 enemy soldiers with no support and no retreat option. Court-martial, dishonorable discharge, prison. Or follow orders, exfiltrate, report, watch Baker Company get slaughtered. His finger touched the trigger. The Springfield weighed 8 pounds. The trigger required 4 pounds of pressure. 2 pounds. 3 pounds. He thought about Tommy Adler, Frankie Blonsky, James Harper. 97 names on his list.
He thought about Captain Holloway saying units function through coordination and command structure. He thought about his father's legs crushed by a ladle because some engineer had calculated chain strength wrong and decided profits mattered more than safety. Sometimes the system kills you, sometimes you break the system. He exhaled half a breath, held it, squeezed. 14 violations. The Springfield cracked. The machine gunner's head snapped back. He dropped behind the weapon. The other Germans froze for 1 second, the universal pause of soldiers processing sudden death. That second cost them everything. Brennan worked the bolt, spent casings ejected, new round chambered. He acquired the second machine gunner, reaching for the weapon. Range unchanged. Squeeze. The second gunner fell across the first. Now the Germans reacted. Shouts in German. Soldiers dove for cover. The Feldwebel screamed orders. Brennan shifted aim. Radio operator reaching for handset. Squeeze. The operator collapsed onto his equipment. 9 seconds. 3 shots, 3 kills. The Germans had no idea where the fire originated. The Feldwebel was smart. He started directing fire at likely sniper positions. The ridgeline, the trees, the bunker to the east. Nowhere near the log. The Germans poured rifle fire into empty forest. Brennan acquired a soldier firing from behind a tree, adjusted for ankle, squeezed. 4 kills, 15 seconds. A German private figured it out. He turned and stared directly at the log, mouth opening to shout. Brennan shot him through the chest. The private went down, but the others saw where he'd been looking. Rifle fire converged on the log. Bullets punched through rotted wood 6 inches above Brennan's head. Splinters rained down. The log shook with impacts. Brennan pressed himself flat, waiting for the volley to pass. It passed. The Germans couldn't maintain fire. They were exposed, and they didn't know if other American snipers were positioned. The Feldwebel made the smart decision. Withdraw! He screamed orders. The remaining 8 soldiers began falling back by pairs, suppressive fire covering movement. Brennan rose to his elbows, acquired a soldier retreating, led the movement, squeezed. The soldier fell. Brennan worked the bolt, acquired another, squeezed. 7 left. They were running now, abandoning the machine gun, abandoning their dead. Brennan counted to 60. No movement, no sound, except Baker Company approaching from the south. He saved his rifle and began extracting himself from the log. It took 3 minutes of painful squirming. His legs had gone completely numb. When he finally pulled himself free, he couldn't stand. He sat against the log, working circulation back into his calves, and counted. 14 shots fired, 8 confirmed kills, probably 9. The chest shot was fatal, but the soldier had fallen behind cover. Machine gun position, neutralized. Radio operator dead, so no warning transmitted to German command. Baker Company emerged from the forest at 11:02. Lieutenant Strickland, their CO, found Brennan sitting against the log, rifle across his lap. Strickland stared at the German bodies, then at Brennan, then back at the bodies. "What the hell happened here, Brennan?" "They were setting up an ambush, sir. I stopped it." "You were supposed to observe and report." "Yes, sir." "Not engage." "Yes, sir." Strickland walked to the machine gun position, examined the bodies, looked at the MG-42's field of fire, perfectly aligned with the trail his company had just walked down. He returned to Brennan. "How many?" It confirmed, 1 probable, 5 escaped. Strickland was quiet for a moment. "Then you saved my company." "Just following doctrine, sir, neutralizing threats to friendly forces." "That's not doctrine. I don't know what that is." Strickland keyed his radio. "Baker 6 to battalion. Contact at grid Echo 7. Multiple enemy KIA. Positions neutralized. Requesting instructions." The radio crackled. Captain Holloway's voice, "Baker 6, identify who made contact." Strickland looked at Brennan. "PFC Brennan, sir." Long pause.
Send him to Battalion HQ immediately. The Reckoning. Brennan arrived at Battalion HQ at 13:40. Captain Holloway was waiting outside the command tent with Lieutenant Hayes and First Sergeant McKenna. Holloway's face was red. Hayes looked worried. McKenna's expression was unreadable. Holloway didn't wait. You disobeyed direct orders. Yes, sir. You engaged enemy forces when explicitly told not to. Yes, sir. You operated independently, risking compromise of your position and endangering battalion intelligence operations. Yes, sir. You also neutralized a machine gun position that would have killed or wounded approximately half of Baker Company. Holloway pulled a folded map from his pocket. Lieutenant Hayes, explain. Hayes spread the map on the field table. Germans have been establishing ambush positions along predictable advance routes. This is the third time this week we've encountered pre-sighted machine gun positions covering forest trails. Intelligence estimates they've been responsible for 60% of our casualties in this sector. Holloway pointed at the map. We've been trying to predict these positions based on terrain analysis and signals intelligence. We've been wrong 3 times. Cost us 42 men. He looked at Brennan. You found one. How? Infiltrated forward of our lines. Found a hide position, waited for them to arrive. In a hollow log. Yes, sir. For 6 hours? Closer to 7, sir. Holloway stared at him. That's insane. It worked, sir. Mechanic cleared his throat. Captain, permission to speak. Go ahead, Sergeant. In 3 weeks, we've lost 97 men to German ambushes. Brennan eliminated 1 ambush position and saved Baker Company. If we're court-martialing him for that, we should court-martial every officer who followed standard doctrine and got soldiers killed. Holloway's jaw tightened. That's not how the Army works, Sergeant. Maybe it should be, sir. Silence. Wind moved through the forest canopy. Somewhere distant, artillery rumbled. Hayes spoke carefully. Sir, I gave Brennan authorization to infiltrate and observe. He exceeded those orders, but the result was successful. If we punish him, we're telling every soldier in this battalion that initiative gets you court-martialed. Holloway paced. If I let this stand, every sniper in 3rd Army will think they can operate independently. We'll have chaos, no coordination, no command structure. Or, McKenna said, we'll have soldiers who take initiative when they see American lives in danger. More silence. Holloway looked at Brennan. You understand you should be facing a court-martial right now? Yes, sir. You disobeyed direct orders. Yes, sir. And you'd do it again, wouldn't you? Brennan didn't hesitate. If it saved American lives, yes, sir. Get out of my sight, Brennan. Report to Lieutenant Hayes for mission planning. If you're going to be a cowboy, you're going to be a supervised cowboy. The ripple effect. Word spread like wildfire. By evening, every rifle company in the battalion knew Brennan had spent 7 hours inside a hollow log and killed 8 Germans before they could ambush Baker Company. Soldiers who'd been ready to call him crazy started asking questions. Private Angelo, one of the scouts who'd escorted Brennan to the log, told his squad. The squad told their platoon, and by nightfall, platoon sergeants were asking Battalion HQ if they could get sniper support using forward hide positions. Staff Sergeant Marcus Wheeler from Charlie Company found Brennan after evening chow. Wheeler was 31, a construction foreman from Georgia who'd helped build half the bunkers at Fort Benning. He sat on Brennan's foxhole rim without asking. Need to know how you did it. Did what? Found the position, the log. How did you know it would work? Germans set ambushes where they expect us to advance. That means trails, clearings, anywhere that channels movement. If you want to stop them, you need to get there first and wait. But you can't dig in, they'll spot fresh earth. You can't climb trees, they own the canopy. You need something that's already there, something they'll ignore. Like a log. Like anything.
Logs, rock formations, deadfall piles, burned-out vehicles, anything that's been there long enough to look natural. Wheeler nodded slowly. Charlie Company pushes east tomorrow. Germans have been hitting us from a bunker complex near Grid Delta 4. You think this would work there? It depends on terrain. Show me. They spent an hour looking at maps. Wheeler pointed out the approach route, known German positions, likely ambush sites. Brennan identified 3 potential hide positions: a collapsed barn foundation, a drainage culvert, and a cluster of boulders on the German side of the line. Wheeler said, "I want to try it. Got a designated marksman in my platoon, kid named Taylor, good shot. Can you teach him?" "Teach him what? How to be me?" Brennan almost laughed. "It's not complicated. Find cover that doesn't look like cover, get there before dawn, stay still, wait for targets. Don't move until you have a shot that matters. That's it."
Oh, and be willing to wait 8 hours in a hole that smells like death and is full of centipedes. Wheeler grinned. Taylor grew up on a farm. He's used to smelling like shit. The doctrine that wasn't. Staff Sergeant Taylor inserted into a collapsed barn foundation on September 21st at 400 hours. The barn had burned during American artillery preparation, leaving only stone foundation walls 2 feet high. Taylor positioned himself in a corner, covered himself with charred lumber and canvas, and waited. At 09:20, a German patrol established an observation post 30 yards from his position. 6 soldiers, one with binoculars, calling coordinates for mortar fire. Taylor waited until the observer completed his first call, then shot him through the head. He killed 2 more before the patrol broke and ran. Charlie Company advanced through that sector with 0 casualties. Word spread wider. By September 25th, 7 snipers across the battalion were using forward hide positions, 3 in logs, 2 in drainage culverts, 1 in a burned-out Stug 3, 1 inside a latrine pit the Germans had abandoned. Results were immediate and measurable. September 1 to 20, average daily casualties from ambush, 4.2. September 21 to 30, average daily casualties from ambush, 1.8. Battalion S2 compiled a report. Estimated enemy ambush positions neutralized, 14. Estimated American lives saved, 63. Method: forward infiltration using natural concealment. Originator: PFC Eddie Brennan. Captain Holloway forwarded the report to regiment. Regiment forwarded to division. Division buried it. No official response, no doctrine change, no training bulletin. Just silence. But soldiers don't need official approval. They need what works. The German response. On October 3rd, a German Oberleutnant named Otto Richter wrote a letter to his wife that was intercepted by Allied intelligence. The Americans have changed tactics. Their snipers no longer position behind their lines. They infiltrate our territory during night, established positions we cannot detect, and wait for us to expose ourselves. Yesterday, we lost 8 men to a sniper we could not locate. The men are calling him Der Geist, the ghost. They found his position after he withdrew, a hollow tree stump, perfectly natural, impossible to distinguish from surrounding forest. This is not how Americans fight. Something has changed. German tactical documents from early October show a pattern: increased caution during dawn operations, mandatory searches of natural cover before establishing positions, reduced reliance on predictable ambush sites. The Americans had introduced randomness into a system the Germans had optimized for efficiency. It disrupted their operational rhythm. A Luftwaffe reconnaissance report dated October 8th noted, American sniper activity has increased significantly in Hürtgen sector. Recommend all ground forces conduct thorough area reconnaissance before establishing static positions.
Enemy demonstrates willingness to infiltrate deep into our territory and remain concealed for extended periods. The Germans never figured out the hollow log technique. They found concealment positions after they'd been vacated, logs, culverts, foundation walls, vehicle wrecks, but they never developed a reliable method to detect them before engagement. The problem was mathematical. The forest contained thousands of potential hide sites. Searching all of them before every operation was logistically impossible. By mid-October, the German units in the Hürtgen sector had adjusted their doctrine. They stopped using predictable ambush sites. They increased patrol frequency. They moved more carefully. All of which meant they killed fewer Americans per engagement because they were too busy protecting themselves to maintain offensive pressure. The ripple effect was working. The bureaucratic dance. On October 12th, Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Webb, the battalion XO, finally asked the question everyone was avoiding. Should we formalize this? He was sitting in the command tent with Captain Holloway, Lieutenant Hayes, and First Sergeant McKenna. Outside, rain hammered the forest. Inside, they studied casualty reports and S2 summaries. Webb continued, "We have 12 snipers operating independently using forward infiltration tactics. No official doctrine, no training standardization, no oversight. It's working, but it's chaos." Holloway said, "If we formalize it, we own it. Right now, if something goes wrong, it's individual soldier initiative. If we make it official doctrine and a sniper gets captured and executed as a spy, we're responsible." Hayes nodded. Germans consider soldiers operating behind their lines in civilian clothes or from disguised positions to be partisans, not lawful combatants. There's precedent for summary execution. McKenna leaned back. "Brennan's been doing this for 3 weeks. Taylor, Rodriguez, Williams, 8 others. None captured, none killed in position. Success rate is 100%. At some point, we need to admit it works and stop pretending it's accidental." Webb studied the map. "Division won't approve it. Too unconventional. Violates every principle of sniper employment in the field manual. But regiment might look the other way if results continue. So we let it continue unofficially. We let it continue, but we establish guidelines, maximum infiltration range, required check-in protocols, exfiltration procedures if compromised. We don't call it doctrine. We call it operational guidelines for designated marksmen in restricted terrain."
Hayes smiled. "That's the most bureaucratic thing I've ever heard." "That's how you get things done in this army," Webb said. "You don't change doctrine. You create guidelines that everyone ignores the old doctrine to follow." The guidelines were distributed on October 15th as a mimeographed 2-page document titled Technical Bulletin HF-44, Designated Marksman Employment in High-Density Forest Environments. It didn't mention hollow logs or forward infiltration. It simply stated, designated marksmen may establish observation positions forward of friendly lines when terrain restricts conventional overwatch capabilities, provided communication protocols are maintained and exfiltration routes are established prior to insertion. Translation, do what Brennan's doing, but tell someone where you are. The numbers don't lie. By November 1st, 19 snipers across 3rd Army's 12th Corps were using forward infiltration tactics. Battalion S2 sections compiled a collective report. Before forward infiltration, SEP 1 through 20, enemy ambush casualties 127. Ambush positions neutralized 3. Average warning time 0 minutes. After forward infiltration, SEP 21 through October 31st, enemy ambush casualties 47. Ambush positions neutralized 31. Average warning time 15 minutes, allowing artillery response. The math was simple. Forward infiltration had reduced ambush casualties by 63%. Conservative estimates credited the tactic with saving approximately 200 American lives in 6 weeks. Nobody thanked Brennan. Technical Bulletin HF-44 didn't mention his name. The S-2 report attributed the success to improved intelligence gathering and tactical adaptation to terrain conditions. Headquarters found it easier to claim institutional credit than acknowledge a private first class had forced them to rewrite doctrine. Brennan didn't care. He kept doing what he'd been doing, inserting into forward positions before dawn, waiting, shooting Germans who tried to ambush his friends. On November 8th, he made his 23rd infiltration, a collapsed root cellar 400 yards into German territory. He spent 11 hours inside, killed 4 Germans setting up a mortar position, exfiltrated at dusk. Routine operation. Just another day. Except that morning, First Sergeant McKenna had recommended him for the Silver Star. Captain Holloway approved it. Lieutenant Colonel Webb signed off. The recommendation went to Division. Division disapproved. Reason given? Insufficient documentation of actions under fire. Translation: we're not giving medals to soldiers who violate doctrine, even when it works. The war ends, the story continues. The Hürtgen Forest campaign ended in December 1944. American casualties, approximately 33,000. German casualties, approximately 28,000. Tactical outcome, inconclusive. The forest remained a killing ground until Allied forces bypassed it entirely during the spring 1945 offensive. But in one battalion of the 28th Infantry Division, casualties from ambush dropped by 63%. Between September and December 1944, in that battalion, soldiers stopped dying to machine guns they never saw. They stopped walking into kill zones designed by Germans who understood the terrain better than American planners. They stopped being predictable. They learned to be ghosts. By war's end, forward infiltration tactics had spread to 7 divisions across 3rd and 7th Armies. Official doctrine never changed. The 1943 Field Manual remained in effect. But training sections quietly began teaching reconnaissance in force techniques that looked suspiciously like what Brennan had invented in a Pennsylvania salvage yard and perfected in a German forest. After Germany surrendered, the Army conducted operational analysis studies. One report, classified until 1954, examined sniper effectiveness in European theater operations. Unconventional employment of designated marksmen in forward concealment positions demonstrated significant tactical advantage in high-density terrain. Recommend further study for incorporation into post-war doctrine revision. The study didn't mention Brennan. It didn't need to. By 1954, every sniper school in the U.S. military taught forward infiltration as standard doctrine. They call it hide site selection and establishment. They taught it with PowerPoint presentations and training manuals. They made it official. They just forgot where it came from. Going home, Eddie Brennan survived the war. He was discharged in October 1945 at Camp Kilmer, New Jersey, with final rank of sergeant and a combat infantryman's badge. No Silver Star, no official recognition for saving 200 lives, just an honorable discharge and a train ticket to Pennsylvania. He went home to Johnstown and took a job at the same salvage yard where he'd worked before the war. He married a nurse named Helen, whom he'd known in high school. They had 3 children. He never talked about the hollow log, never mentioned the 14 Germans he'd killed in 4 hours, never explained why he'd get quiet sometimes in the fall, when leaves covered the ground and the forest smell came through the windows. In 1963, a military historian researching unconventional tactics in World War II found Technical Bulletin HF-44 in Army archives. The historian traced its origin through after-action reports and S2 summaries back to a single incident in September 1944. An unnamed PFC who had neutralized a machine gun position while operating alone from inside a hollow log.
The historian spent 2 years tracking down witnesses, interviewing veterans, cross-referencing unit rosters. He found Eddie Brennan operating a crane at Johnstown Salvage and Scrap, age 42, 2 days from retirement. The historian asked if Brennan remembered September 18, 1944. Brennan said, "Can't say I do. What happened that day?" The historian showed him the S2 report, the casualty statistics, the doctrine changes that followed. He explained how forward infiltration tactics were now taught at Fort Benning and Quantico, how thousands of soldiers had been trained in techniques Brennan had invented, how modern sniper doctrine traced directly back to that hollow log in the Hürtgen Forest. Brennan read the documents, finally said, "That's interesting." "Is there anything you want to say about it?" the historian asked. "Not really. You saved hundreds of lives, changed how the Army fights. You're a significant figure in military history." Brennan handed the documents back. "I just didn't want to watch any more kids die. That's all it was." Legacy of the Ghost. The historian published his findings in a 1967 academic paper, The Evolution of American Sniper Doctrine, 1944 to 1965. The paper identified Brennan by name as the originator of forward infiltration tactics and credited him with approximately 200 lives saved through direct and indirect results of his innovation. The paper was read by approximately 1,400 people, mostly military historians and tactical instructors. Nobody sent Brennan a copy. Eddie Brennan died in April 1992 at age 71, complications from emphysema. The Johnstown Tribune-Democrat ran a 4-paragraph obituary noting he was a WW2 veteran, worked 47 years in salvage, survived by wife Helen, 3 children, 7 grandchildren. One sentence mentioned he'd served as an infantry sniper. The obituary didn't mention the hollow log, didn't mention Technical Bulletin HF-44, didn't mention the 200 lives saved or the doctrine that changed because a 22-year-old kid from the salvage yards decided sometimes you break the rules to save your friends. His funeral was attended by 43 people. No military honor guard, no flag ceremony, just family and co-workers, and a few old soldiers who knew him before he went to war. They buried him in Grandview Cemetery, overlooking the valley where Bethlehem Steel used to stand, where his father had worked the furnaces, where Eddie had learned that systems sometimes fail, and when they do, someone has to act. The Memorial. In 2015, the Army Sniper School at Fort Benning unveiled a new memorial honoring the development of American sniper doctrine. The memorial featured 7 bronze plaques describing key innovations in sniper tactics from WWI through Iraq. Plaque 4 detailed forward infiltration and hide site utilization as developed during WW2 European operations. The plaque didn't mention Eddie Brennan. It credited tactical evolution in response to operational requirements. But in a small section of Arlington National Cemetery, there's a memorial wall where military historians inscribe the names of soldiers whose innovations changed warfare, but who died without recognition. Eddie Brennan's name is there. 10th row, 3rd column, between a Marine who invented jungle camouflage and a sailor who redesigned convoy escort patterns. Most people walk past without looking. The truth about change. That's how real change happens in war. Not through generals and medals, not through official doctrine and institutional credit, through soldiers who see the problem, understand the solution, and act, knowing the system might punish them, knowing history might forget them, doing it anyway because sometimes saving lives matters more than following orders. That's the story of the hollow log. That's the story of Eddie Brennan. That's how one man with a Springfield rifle changed how armies fight. Sitting motionless inside rotting wood, watching Germans die, keeping Americans alive, and never asking for anything except the chance to do it again tomorrow.